Hello, welcome back. Or if you happen to be new, my name is Delian. This is the channel where we explore becoming the main character of our own lives, which I believe we're all here to do. And this is the Enneagram series where I break down every type and what I believe their journey is towards transformation. So if this kind of content is interesting to you, helpful, or valuable in any way, I would love if you would like, subscribe, or comment. I live for the comments. Tell me about your experience with your Enneagram type, what you would nuance with what I'm saying. This is essentially what I feel like a living document of a channel where we get to explore together. So I can't wait to see you in the comments, and let's go ahead and start. And let's talk about Enneagram 6's. Okay, first things first, we do have a puppy here. She is snoring, as she is wont to do. She had her vet appointment today, one of her checkups, and she's doing super good. But now she's exhausted and wants to be cuddled and close. So we'll see if she says anything during this. I'm sure it will be deep wisdom if she does. All right, so if you haven't watched these other videos that I'm doing in this series, essentially what I'm doing is I'm approaching each of the Enneagram types as though I was also filling out the formula of creating a great character in a story who has to go through a transformation. And I think it's really interesting to be able to answer these questions through the lens of an Enneagram type, because I think we start seeing how we can have more agency over our own transformational journey. So in any world where you have to build a character, whether that's an actor, writer, any kind of storytelling, the first question that gets asked is, what does this character want? And 6's want to find security, to have guidance and trust, to know that they are supported and are prepared for whatever comes. And then so you can see how all of that would propel the storyteller to be able to understand how this character will react in any given situation, because this is their driving force, the want that they have. That's the biggest want, right? And also, we must create, especially if there's going to be a transformational journey, we have to answer the question of, what is the wound? And the messier the wound, the more we like it, because then when the transformation happens, it feels amazing. We love before and afters. So what is the wound for Enneagram 6's? And I describe the wound in Enneagram language as the narrative that we adopted in order to adapt to our circumstances. And so the 6 at some point have the narrative of, I cannot rely on myself. I must find something outside of myself that I can trust. And because the next part of this process is, what is their strength? Like, how do they intuitively move through the world? And 6's are in the head center. And what this means is that they are going to use their brain to strategize, to constantly be thinking about all of the possibilities, and to then do what it takes to be prepared for those things. And from here we can start getting a sense of like what the wounded drive might look like. And so it's like that they fear that being without support, being without guidance, or having no security would be the worst. That being abandoned or unprepared and unable to handle what happens. That unable to handle what happens, I think, is very associated with 5, 6's, and 7's in general for the head type. And then what is for building a character, what is the core flaw? And for an Enneagram language, this is called the vice. And for 6's, the vice is fear. And I want to talk about this a little bit because it's a fear that they they can't trust themselves. It's a lack of self-trust. So the fear can look like, if I can anticipate every possibility, question everything, and find some level of certainty, I will finally feel safe. And so their strategy then becomes planning ahead. They are going to seek guidance outside of themselves. They're going to question all of the motives of all of that guidance, because they have to question in order to be able to figure out all of the possible problems that could occur. And they want to do that in order to mitigate risks or to prepare for risks. They will test relationships in order to create safety by knowing who's loyal. And there's a kind of vigilance that can show up here, and a constant questioning. And they are questioning other people. But I also think it's really important to understand that I think 6's, and tell me if you are a 6 if this is true or not, that the questioning is happening because they're also questioning themselves. They have a very hard time landing on something that they feel like is strong enough, supportive enough, facts that are going to be reliable enough for them to be able to be safe enough to move through life. And so that they are in what's known as the responsive stance, and in lots of different teachings, there's the idea that humans we have a mind, we have a heart, we have a body, and that we think, we feel, and we do. We have behavior, thinking, and feeling. And in the Enneagram world, there's a stacking of where those line up. For 6's, they are thinking first, primarily, but because of that self-trust issue, that drops down to the least accessible, or what I would prefer to call least productive, for the 6's in particular. And so their intelligence is thinking, but because they don't trust all of the thinking, they go into feeling and doing until they can trust themselves. And so how that looks like for 6's is that they move towards others and other systems to find reassurance, to get the support, even though they're testing all of that support in those systems to prove whether or not it can be trusted. So if you are a 6, I feel like this must be very exhausting. And I just want to note that, and I want to give you a lot of love and have awareness for it, because I think it must be really hard to really long for support, but know that you have to question that support in order to make sure that it's actually support. And I see you. I see you. And as 6's bring up their productive thinking, which I think for them is some form of true self-trust. There are two in Enneagram world. I don't know why I said it that way. For Enneagram 6's, there's something called the phobic 6, which is you can see they know that they're afraid, and other people can see that they're afraid. And then you have the counterphobic 6, which is still being driven by that lack of self-trust, which is what I'm associating the fear with. But they ignore it, and they just do the exact thing that they're afraid of. But both of these have a lack of true assessment. And so what I notice is that as each of the types bring up their repressed or most unproductive center, for 6's, this is wisdom, thinking things through, trusting that they can, in fact, have enough facts to move forward without having to outsource their sense of security. when they bring that up, I think this is when the real transformation for 6's starts to happen. So transformation to me is when you start living in the healed narrative of your Enneagram type. So earlier, I talked about the wounded narrative, which is I cannot rely on myself. I can't trust myself. I must find something or someone outside of me that I can trust in order to feel okay. The transformational narrative is the exact opposite, which is choosing, and this does not happen overnight. This happens steadily. This happens with like dedicated work. I keep saying this over and over again because I think it's important. That act 2 in stories is long, it's hard. It's the longest part of a story, and that is because it takes true effort to go through a transformation. And if it happens too fast, we are left unsatisfied or we don't believe it actually happened. And so as I say this transformational narrative, just realize that I don't think it happens overnight. So the opposite of the Enneagram 6's wound is I can trust myself. I do not need absolute certainty to move forward. And with this, there's courage that comes from taking action, even when the outcome is not known. You don't get to know the outcome. But you do get to trust yourself in whatever might happen. And as 6's move through this transformation, they get access to the virtue. I like thinking it as like the power of each of the types, like true empowerment shows up here. And for 6's, it's courage, which is you trust yourself instead of reacting in fear. And I think that there is an element here that I think 6's have associated fear with uncertainty. And what happens, I think, instead is that the uncertainty is always there. Like it doesn't actually ever get to go away. The courage shows up when the uncertainty is there, and instead of reacting in anxiety, they react in courage. This does not mean that anxiety or fear does not instinctually show up. I think it does. Again, this is the narrative that we're choosing to change. I don't think we just step into courage. I think we change the narrative every time. Well, what we work on is to have more of the healed narrative versus the wounded narrative. And then the virtue, which is what it's called in the Enneagram world, is that courage that you then just embody. It's the power you step into. And this is where that real shift happens. So we're at the end of the story. We're at the end of the transformation. What does the shift look like for 6's? They begin acting from that inner trust instead of fear. They stop searching for something outside of themselves to guarantee safety and become their own source of stability, confidence, and guidance. There's a lot of language around 6's being very loyal, and they are. But when they move into this shift, the loyalty gets to be directed towards themselves and others instead of just being loyal to others in order to get the safety and security you need. You can actually be loyal to your own sense of self, your own belief in your ability to know what you need, to have enough of the answers to move forward. So there we have it, the transformational arc of Enneagram 6's. I am planning, as this channel continues on, to do character breakdowns of each of the types and really go into detail how this story arc shows up. If there are characters that are Enneagram 6's that you know of, that you would love for me to be able to pick apart, please put them in the comments. I am gathering all of my my lists of different characters that I can do this with, but hearing from each of the types which characters they would resonate with most or really like to see this breakdown happen with, I would love to hear from you. And again, let me know what you would nuance in this, what you would add. I am sure you have questions. I'm sure you have thoughts about things that I didn't say as clearly as I could have, or things that you're like, actually, this is my experience, not necessarily what you were saying here. I love going through this channel as though it were a living document. Like, I don't have all of the answers. I like instead feeling like I'm in the trenches with you, figuring this out. I just want to do it through the lens of storytelling and agency to be able to utilize this knowledge so that we can actually own our stories, to be responsible for our own experience and move through our life as the main character of it. So again, if this is interesting to you, if you find this valuable at all, I love your comments, like, subscribe, and I will see you in another video. Okay, bye.